And now we have Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. Or is it Jerry Niven and Larry? No.
Don't do that.
We'll get everybody. But I want to first mention to the people who are calling in now that the books that we're giving away have been given away. And so next time, there's no need to hang on the phone lines right now. But we will be going back to phones later when we're talking to our guests.
I recently caught my wife getting the Larry and Jerry mixed up.
That's bad.
Well, we used to
That's
have a pair of
bad.
badges.
Normal. Every one of our friends has done that, and we've gotten very good at reassuring them.
Yes. We used to have a pair of convention badges, one that said, "Not Jerry Niven," and the other one said, "Not Larry Purnell."
Bill Rotzler badges,
Yes.
of course.
Yeah.
Your audience must be familiar with
With
Rotzler
Bill.
badges.
Yes. He's looking great nowadays.
Ah.
Kevin, he was in bad shape for a while there. He's looking terrific now.
Uh-huh.
Life saved by Len Wein.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Yep. He was.
Bill was in what amounts to a diabetic coma.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know he had diabetes either.
Yeah.
Len
Ooh.
Yeah.
went to his house and found him
Yep.
in time to get him into the
Yep.
hospital.
Got him to a hospital, and then the Turners made him stay with them for about 2 weeks. And there are some good people in this world.
There are. There are some good people in this world.
There are some good people in this field. We got more than our
Mhm.
share.
Yeah.
Wonder why that is.
I don't know. Science fiction writers tend to help each other. Science fiction fans tend to be decent people. I don't know why. Because it's not true with mystery people. Mystery writers are very paranoid about, I got an idea and I don't want to talk to this guy because he might steal it. And
Where science fiction writers share
We
ideas.
spark the ideas off each other.
Sure.
We want the help. In the middle of a story, when it won't quite shape up, I often want some help. I'll go to my friends.
yeah.
And you give help when they ask for it.
Oh,
Sure. I've been responsible for some of your best reading
I will agree with that.
by other people.
By other people, right?
Dragon's Egg. I told Robert Forward what the story would have to be about.
Mm-hmm.
He hadn't tumbled to that. He might have.
And he
Eventually.
might not have, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you and Forward seem to have this, at some points, have this ongoing competition in terms of black holes and things.
It's very much a collaboration of sorts. I sent him my notes after they'd reached a certain stage for the integral trees.
Yeah.
And,
Uh-huh.
and they came back
You don't know
with
how
a
we met, do you?
ratification and considerable additional detail.
Yeah. You
They
don't know how
weren't-
we met, do you?
Those trees weren't
We
integral
were going to ask about that.
science.
Yeah. No, I mean forward.
Why don't you tell
I
us how
had
you
written
met?
a
ahead,
story. I had written a
Which
story
one?
called "He Fell into a Dark Hole," in which I had postulated that you
Analog
could have
story.
the-
Yeah.
it was an analog. Say it was analog science fiction. And the next thing I know, my telephone rings. I don't know exactly how Forward had managed to get my phone number, but he had, and he calls up and said, "You're the first guy who ever understood that you could have gravitational stress and gravitational waves and people kind of coming apart." And I said, "Gee, that's nice." And then I discovered that here's a guy who knows more about gravity than anybody in the world except maybe Joe Weber. And he's out at Hughes and said, "Would you like to come visit my lab? Would I like to come visit your lab? Oh, don't throw me in that briar patch. Please don't throw me in that." So he did, and I took Larry, who had not previously met him, and we went out there, and then
Jerry did things as a reporter for Twin Peaks?
Twin Circles.
Twin
yeah.
Circles, the Catholic newspaper with a circulation of a couple of million.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
And from time to time, on something interesting, he'd take his collaborator along.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
We watched a Stephen Hawking lecture, a crucial one at Caltech,
Yeah.
that way. And we drove out to Bob Forward's place on the strength of Bob Forward claiming Jerry had beat him into print on gravitational storms.
Yeah, quite literally, he had written a non-fictional piece about the same thing that I had put in my fictional story. So,
And so that's how you and Forward met.
yeah, quite pleased by that.
He lectured us all afternoon on every conceivable subject.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and Larry, didn't you have with a Whole Man?
Yeah,
You- there
I
was-
went home. When Jerry
Mhm.
and I drove
That was
us home,
after the
I was
Hawking.
swearing I'd beat him into print on quantum black holes,
Yep,
as
Uh-huh.
they
he
were
did.
called then.
And he did.
You guys just had a new book out, The Gripping Hand.
Yeah, talk about
And yes, I want to talk about that.
it.
'cause
Go
it's,
buy The Gripping Hand.
It's a neat book.
You
It's-
will go to your bookstore. You will say, "I want a copy of The Gripping Hand."
It's a sequel to A Mote in God's Eye.
Yeah.
We got you hooked.
20 years
20
ago,
years
you got
ago.
us hooked.
Yeah.
That's the only problem, is it took you guys 20 years to do a sequel to Mote.
It took 15 to think of what it would be.
Why don't you, before we talk about the Gripping Hand, just briefly, for people who haven't read the Mote, why don't you sketch out the setup on Mote that jumped
Go
in?
read the book.
Yeah,
It's far
just
too
Better
complicated.
to read the book. The truth is, it's a complicated setup.
The Mote in God's Eye is, according to Robert Heinlein, the best first contact with aliens novel he ever read in his life, and Frank Herbert agreed to that too.
but you're-
So go read it. If you've read it, you know you don't need us to summarize it. And
I
if you
can
haven't
lay-
read it, you have a treat in store for you.
I can lay out a bit of a sketch.
Just a 30-second one.
Okay. Pournelle's empire of humanity has become the second empire and covers 1,000 worlds by 1,000 years from now, and that's when I joined Jerry to pick it up. I look at his star drive and I realize there can be an alien world undiscovered right in the middle of his empire because of the way the Alderson drive, the interstellar drive, works.
Because it goes point to point.
Because it goes star to star, but it goes around the
30.
intervening distance.
Okay, give us another.
Therefore,
I took me a minute, Jerry, to realize what you were doing.
the
Go on.
story is about first contact, the empire of 1,000 worlds of humankind, and an isolated system of creatures who have been intelligent tool users for over 1 million years, maybe several million.
Okay.
They've also got a hell of a population problem, but that evolves as the book goes on.
Okay, and at the end of that, basically...
The end of
You've got
that's
a
a
blockade.
Mexican standoff.
Right, okay, and that's the setup, is at the end of that, you got a Mexican standoff, now the Gripping Hand starts.
In
Yes.
fact, at the end of that, you have the moat around Murchison's eye.
Yes.
You have the way out blocked by the Empire of Man. The Modis cannot escape into the Empire because their only route leads through Murchison's eye, a red supergiant star.
Yeah.
And the Empire is scared to death
They're
of the
really scared
Modis.
of them, and as long as they keep the Navy there. But the trouble is that keeping 30 years is a long time to have maintained a blockade. You get
And
sloppy in 30 years, among other things. So.
tired.
Mm.
And so the Gripping Hand is set up at the end of that
Yeah.
20 years. and-
20-something years later.
It goes to 30 years. I think the book
Yeah.
covers a couple of years.
Yes.
I really enjoyed it. The beginning was interesting.
It also has the most unlikely hero you will ever imagine. You will not have supposed that and in fact, Locust took us to task for that. We got our ritual trashing from Locust in this.
What did... Well, we won't talk about why they didn't like it, because I liked it.
Yeah, so did I. We got
Um,
good reviews, too. We got a star in Kirkus. We are on the bestseller list in several major cities now. And
But you've got a nice opening. It builds slowly. You've got some interesting things to
Yeah.
see along the way.
see, Locust didn't like the opening novelette because they said that it could have been published separately. Well, as a matter of fact, it certainly
Yes.
could have been.
We thought
But-
we had that sold to Marvel Comics.
Yeah, and
For a
yes,
graphic
yeah,
novel.
for a graphic novel. But in fact, it needed that separate story to set the stage for what was happening for people who have not read Mote.
And
Mhm.
besides,
And simultaneously,
I like it.
and besides,
Yeah,
it's
it's a
a
good story.
whacking good story.
Yes.
It's just that, yes, it is in a sense, yet we did have to write another story to keep you going so that you get into this one if you hadn't read Mote. And at the same time, it had to be interesting enough that if you had read Mote, you would still want to read it.
Yeah.
And that's always the problem with sequels, is how do you deal with the person who hasn't read the first book? And I think we dealt with them fairly in this.
Yeah,
think we did.
when I read The Gripping Hand, I purposely did not go back and read Mote, because I had read Mote 20-something years ago, whatever, when it came out.
That was shrewd for a reviewer.
And so I didn't want to reread Mote. I wanted to see what would happen if, having had the intervening years for the memories to soften. And I didn't have any real trouble following anything.
Yeah, good.
It helps that Mote was one of the most memorable stories.
Yeah, it's been around a while, and it has certainly, it's never been out of print.
But what I noticed, you have your opening novelette, your opening segment, and it builds nice and slowly and gives you a nice, interesting view of the empire at that time. My only complaint was, so you've got this things going on, you've got the people who are trying to keep the Modis contained, and then I'm reading it, and I get to the section where the humans go back through the Alderson point, back into the Modi system, and I hit that point roughly at midnight on a work night. That was not nice of you.
I just love hearing I ruined somebody's night of sleep.
Yeah, one of my favorite fan letters was from a guy who wrote me about Lucifer's hammer and said, basically, you damn near cost me my job. you rotten swine. I started reading that book and I couldn't stop reading it, and now I'm a broken man. Well, okay, I like that, yes.
In the opening of the book, you have an interesting scene set in a restaurant.
Cradle Grapes.
The Cradle
Yes.
Grapes scene you will love if you are ancient fandom.
Yes.
What is that?
Cradle
Can
Grapes
you
is a
explain
reference.
that?
Joke.
It's
Yes.
a reference.
Could you explain
That's all.
No.
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 Actually, yeah, it's a reference to a cartoon.
It's a B. Joe Trimble
Yeah.
cartoon. She drew, supposed to take place during a convention. Okay, guy at a dining table. The dish in front of him, there are tentacles trying to crawl out, and the waitress is saying, "If you don't like cradled grapes, why did you order it?"
Yeah, why do you order them?
Okay.
Yes, right. So we did Cradle Grapes.
Yeah, we created the cradled grapes cuisine.
Yes, I know. It's challenging.
And yes, challenging. And there's a point to it. And as a matter of fact, the proprietor who lectures to them in the restaurant,
Yeah.
Larry and I, just before we wrote that scene, had gone to an Indian curry place. It was excellent curry. But the proprietor came around to the table and proceeded to lecture us. I don't know how anyone can smell a good curry and not eat it. There is nothing in that curry that is not wholesome. He goes on and on and on and on.
Very
with it.
much like a health nut who is
I was
audience.
wondering because I'd heard that something in the cradle grapes scene was from a real restaurant.
It was indeed. It was from a real restaurant, from a curry joint. Well, it
it
wasn't a
has
joint; it was a
vanished,
fairly
I regret
upscale
to
restaurant.
say.
But yeah,
Is that why so many of your books have such an air of verisimilitude in that
Sure.
you pull real events from real time?
Often. The beginning of Footfall is virtually autobiographical.
sure.
Yeah.
I'm the guy who looked at the twisted F ring and said, "Haven't you ever seen three earthworms in love?"
Yeah.
Well, at the time that was of the Voyager flyby of Saturn, I was working at JPL, and somebody had sketched out a cartoon. I can't remember who it
Joe, I
was,
betcha.
where it had the F ring, the braided ring, and it had Darth Vader. and
Yeah,
someone said,
that's a B.
Darth
Joe
Va-
Trimble.
It's a
Yes.
B. Joe
You
Trimble
have a
cartoon.
twisted mind, Darth Vader. Yes, right.
As
yes,
Darth
yes,
Vader is
yes.
twisting the rings.
Yes, yeah, that was a B. Joe Trimble cartoon. Yes, I'm responsible for all those mad science fiction writers being out there at JPL for that encounter.
Right, and how did that? Why don't you tell how that
just
happened?
I had perfectly good credentials as a regular press reporter, and I had convinced some of the JPL people that it would be no bad thing for them to have the science fiction writers there. I mean, in a sense, we're there as a matter of right, huh? You wouldn't have that world if we hadn't made it happen. And for a long while, the NASA people agreed with us, and they essentially asked me to come up with a list of. They couldn't let everybody claim to be a science fiction writer in it. It never, it would have been too many. So I had to come up with a list of sort of qualified people as to who should be there, and I think we did fairly well. After a while, it all changed, and by the time the night of the landing of Viking on Mars, they threw Mr. Heinlein out of the von Karman Center for not having the proper press credentials. So
Yes, I also remember you told a story about how all the press didn't follow Mr.
they didn't
Heinlein.
follow him up to the cafeteria because they wanted to interview him. Why did they want to talk to the governor of California, for God's sakes, So